Jacqueline Osherow is the author of 7 poetry collections, the most recent of which are Ultimatum from Paradise, published in 2014, and My Lookalike at the Krishna Temple, which debuted just 2 weeks ago. Osherow has received prizes, awards, and fellowships from the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters, the Poetry Society of America, and the Guggenheim Foundation, and her poems have been anthologized in many places, including Best American Poetry twice. Osherow earned her BA from Radcliffe College at Harvard and a PhD from Princeton University. She is currently Distinguished Professor of English and Creative Writing at the University of Utah. Osherow's poems feel like peering into the mind of a thoughtful friend with an impressive lexicon and a good sense of humor. Her poems often rhyme, are often written in terza rima and other complex forms, and are conversational and recursive, ever so curious of the logic and mystery in the world around her, including in languages, art, and memory. Osherow's Jewish heritage provides fodder for many of her poems, prompting her to investigate in particular the holy writings of the Old Testament, the Yiddish language and its near extinction, and the effects of the Holocaust on her cultural identity and family relationships. Of her poetic style, she has said, "If I write out of a specific poetic tradition, it is the Jewish poetic tradition, American poet though I am. If that's the case, it's clear we need more of that Jewish tradition in poetry, as Osherow's poetry is like nothing I've read before, in a few words, challenging and so delightful. We are so honored to have her here at BYU today. Please welcome Jacqueline Osherow.
Thank you so much for that. But beware of what you ask for. So I'll start. I always say I write 2 kinds of poems, long and short. I'll start with short, and then it's going to get long. Okay. So this is a sonnet. It's a little early for it, but I thought I'd try it. Spring arrives late to Salt Lake City. Why so hesitant, spring? What's the problem? I've never known you quite this shy. You're like a new girl in junior high, avoiding the hallways, the lunchroom, strangely oblivious of your own beauty, or perhaps afraid of it, keeping it hidden. But what's happening? All of a sudden, you're trying prom dresses on all over the city. Absurdly poofy pinks, whites, purple, reds, yards and yards of crinoline beneath each skirt. And now you're tearing them up. Exquisite shreds cover streets, cars, sidewalks, rooftops, grass. You're back to all or nothing, spring. I'm envious. I aimed to be like that, but I lost heart. I have a long series of poems about the Alhambra, which of course is this great Moorish structure in southern Spain, in Granada, Andalusia, where the Moors ruled for 300 years. And I started to write these poems because I heard the most amazing thing, which is there are only and exactly 17 kinds of two-dimensional symmetry in the world, and all 17 are on display in the Alhambra. And of course, in those times, it was the high point of math. You know, algebra comes from Arabic, aljabar. It was also a high point in poetry, a high point in culture in the world. Anyway, I just found this really interesting. What else? I mentioned Alexandria because Euclid is from Alexandria. I hope that does it for this. So this is just one section of my poems from the Alhambra, and it's section 2, symmetry 1. 1. At 3 or 4, I stumbled on an iridescent secret. Did I understand its power? I'm not sure. How beauty inheres, at least in 2 dimensions, in a slim and ever-shifting equilibrium between proportion and accumulation. 2. Flat, bright wooden blocks, each shape a different color, insulated hours of my childhood. However I'd maneuver them, an airtight fit, not a thread of carpet in between, as they supplanted its impassive beige with the florid hocus-pocus of geometry. 3. 6 blue diamonds splayed like petals of a flower left just enough room for 6 green triangles, each of whose equal sides equaled in length each side of the blue diamond, the orange square, the yellow hexagon I proudly referred to as an octagon, itself equal in size to a mirrored pair of the strange red shapes, isosceles trapezoids, I'd call them in another decade, conjoined at their sole unequal sides. 4. To a young child, the possibilities were infinite, the outcomes elaborate and splendid, so much more exalted than what crayons might produce with their double-crossing, heavy-handed scroll. 5. Each fresh arrangement on the living room carpet an otherworldly visitation, the aggregate wildly outdistancing the parts, assembled by my newly potent hands. 6. Here, at the Alhambra, they returned to me, after more than 50 years, flush with memories, hyperbolic splendor. 7. And I want to imagine the Moorish ceramicists as undisputed masters of my pattern blocks, fitting shape into shape in seamless repetition, dumbstruck by the reach of their own hands. 8. But theirs was a schema so deliberate, so esoteric, that modern-day practitioners of algebra's group theory encounter these designs with disbelief. On the walls of the Alhambra appear all known variants of patterned symmetry in 2 dimensions, distinctions I can barely fit my brain around. Translation symmetry, rotation symmetry, simple or glide reflection symmetry, converging at the whim of an all-defining lattice, triangle, parallelogram, hexagon, on which every pattern must revolve. 9. For me, it's an article of faith. The mathematics is a bit beyond me, that the possible combinations of configurations add up to a mystic 17. The sum of the days required even by God to extract a resting universe from chaos, added to the quantity of highly calibrated instruments refining the efforts of what otherwise would be our inarticulate and clumsy hands. 10. All the variations in 2 dimensions compounded and rendered indivisible, except by a halcyon and non-intrusive but nonetheless all-pervasive 1. 11. One more 1, and we'd have arrived at the radiant, untouchable 18, which in Hebrew spells out life itself, as well as ordering our prayers. 9 of direct light, 9 of refracted light, but that's Kabbalah. We dare not go there. 12. And to think that all I see is beauty, the multiple patterns launching one another in a cryptic, magisterial processional, assiduously nurturing the unapt eye to rise to its luxuriant occasion. 13. And there are fountains, I must speak of them, and gardens and pillars minutely carved, and poems in Arabic inspiriting the walls. Permanence belongs to God. The fingers of my maker wove my fabric after setting the jewels in my crown. 14. Some mathematicians will tell you it's not clear that the artisans knew what they were doing, as if all 17 possibilities of symmetry could show up in a single palace by accident. They'll tell you there's no mathematical treatise describing the phenomenon from that time. 15. But isn't the Alhambra itself the treatise? Its mathematicians, so certain of their proofs, they perform them with supremely complex plasterwork and monumental batches of laboriously fashioned tile, each piece molded, fired, colored, fired, glazed, and fired, and glazed, and fired again, as if time were a limitless commodity. 16. As it was to me in front of a black and white barrage, infinite, alternately riveting and boring, a grave-faced man enunciating clearly, a Russian pounding tables with a shoe, my colored blocks and I devising pattern after pattern, an ever-changing continuum in 17 varieties, rotating, reflecting, gliding, red, orange, green, yellow, blue, each one commanded by an unseen fleet of elegant axioms and theorems, true as very few dictums are true, detected thousands of years ago on a beach in Alexandria and feted on a hilltop in Granada. 17. But initially, who knows, perhaps a momentary fancy at the instant when day one became day two. A quick formulation between light and darkness and the strata of a freshly crafted firmament whose insubstantial fabric had not yet been disrupted by the clamor of the stars and sun and moon. The earth itself still enmeshed in chaos, its flowers and grass and animals as yet unsummoned by a voice unaccustomed to its own reverberations, immaculate, permanent, thorough. 18. Perhaps it too is astonished by its reach. From each new utterance, a full-fledged marvel, to which another marvel will accrue. Pattern after pattern, diminishing the chaos, motionless in a final glaze of holiness, immaculate, intricate, and very, very good. Heavens, earth, and all their retinue. Okay. I lost a colleague this week, Francois Camoin, who was a wonderful fiction writer and teacher. And so it makes me want to read this poem, Counting My Losses. 1 by fire, 4 at will, 1 who'd hang, 1 who'd pull the plug on his own ventilator, 1 who'd hit the crowded water just beneath the Golden Gate, 1 who learned to operate a shotgun bought an hour past, 1 too slowly, 1 too fast, 2 from age, 1 broken hip, 1 too weak to wake from sleep, 1 who'd slip a cliffside path, 1 surgery's botched aftermath, 1 who wept, 1 who prayed, 1 heart, alas, ineptly made, 1 who moved a single thumb, ALS, her conundrum, brain intact while body withers, cancer, of course, for all the others. I'll read this one about Fez. Fez is a pretty marvelous place. But the thing that I refer to here that you couldn't possibly know about if you hadn't been there, when you go to Fez, this is in Morocco, they take you to a ledge over which you look at the dyeing vats for dyeing the Moroccan leather that's so famous. And so you look down on these incredibly gigantic, incredibly colorful vats, and it's this incredible, it's just an extraordinary sight. And I refer to it here. It would be impossible to know what I'm talking about. The other thing I referred to is the shofar, which is the ram's horn that Jews blow during the days of awe, the high holidays. It's a very eerie and strange sound. Ancient sounding. Okay. So this is Fez postcard, call to prayer. A jeweler holds a magnet to his silver to prove its purity. There's no pull. A seller wraps a package for a buyer who's never quite assented to the sale. A flash and then another as a weaver shuttles spun agave silk through wool. And then a blast of sound, a change of air. At once the market's hustle, bustle, trivial. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, even if business does go on as usual. The world seems to refine itself, each color more acute, each syllable, each smell. The sharp scent of cedar where a carpenter planes and sands an ornate floral grill, cumin laced with cardamom and coriander, the spice seller's stall, rose petal, fennel, or orange blossom just pressed to attar, escaping from a shapely crystal vial. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Every vista turns devotional. The gorgeous rows of vats for dyeing leather, for yellow saffron, for red poppy flower, spearmint mixed with indigo for teal, are bright-robed worshippers who've joined to kneel in unison and chant Allahu Akbar. God is great and powerful. As stragglers head to fountains to splash water on hands and feet and face, and then unroll the mats they keep with them, each a small but resolutely holy house of prayer. I too was taught that sanctity is portable. Words can be carried anywhere. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Our God also great and powerful, but no sound punctuates the air to call us to our 3 times daily ritual, except on days of awe from the shofar. Here, the otherworldly is habitual, if perhaps ignored, the atmosphere never without at least a telltale smattering of freshly distilled attar of the unabashedly eternal. As if a vial were always running over, ready to anoint each head with oil. A flash in the shuttle of a weaver, a glimmer from a distant market stall. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Even I, failed believer, feel its pull. Okay, these have all been from this new book. My 8th, by the way, not 7, 8. But I thought I'd read a couple of new poems, since one wants to do that, to hear what one's working on now. So we'll call this first. I never would have written if I wasn't asked for it. I was asked for a poem about a Utah national park for the anniversary of the national parks, the 100th anniversary, and I really don't think Bryce Canyon needs my poem, but I wrote one, and I thought, well, you're Utahns, you know what I'm talking about. I'm reading this poem here. So this is Inspiration Point, Bryce Canyon, Utah. Maybe it was just for this that God pulled water from dry land, to rescue hoodoo after hoodoo. That's what they're called, a bastardization of voodoo, these unrepeatable needles of rock, geology's answer to flakes of snow. A sound enough hypothesis, dark magic. But I like God's approach, so straightforward. The light, the land, the sky, each feat of handiwork, a matter of a single uttered word. That's the first version. The clumsy second was more hands-on, with dust and ribs required. Though it's a stretch to claim this place was planned. Maybe, just like us, God was stupefied. He rarely knew how any day would end, had to see things finished to call them good. Here, he might even have done without the bric-a-brac of the days that followed, except the 4th days, bodies of light, essential for the colors of the stone, the greater light especially adroit. Just watch it nurse a puny flame at dawn, purple with an edging of vermilion, by sunrise to a full-fledged conflagration, then temper it to golden rose by noon, darker still as day begins to fail. The oranges go bronze, the reds maroon, the whole place solid indigo by nightfall, except on nights when a full or near full moon applies its inlay, mother of pearl, on a lamina of coral and carnelian. Or the moon's a no-show, no stone visible, just black on black, spikes and spires gone. That's when you look up, the sky's grand central, no light pollution, no clouds, conditions ideal, rush hours hubbub irresistible, the stars, its thronged commuters, cheek by jowl. The park has telescopes. I once saw Jupiter, but I prefer an open free-for-all, the peripheral inkling of a meteor, or was that a satellite, or diving owl? Some flora and fauna did make their way here eventually. Swashbucklers all, rattlesnake, manzanita, prickly pear. Its shock of blossoms at the end of April, slow-motion fireworks, the canyon floor lost beneath magentas, yellows, reds, or bristlecone pine, launching spectacular high-wire acrobatics off the cliffsides, where that gifted horticulturist, the nuthatch, a glutton for its seeds, disseminates them when it stops to rest. Quite ingenious of God, if oddly fanciful, for so inveterate a fatalist. That is, if God's mixed up in this at all. The park prefers the Paiutes explanation. The hoodoos were once the legend people, shape-shifters native to this region, turned for some unnameable transgression by vigilant coyote into stone, their face paint still intact, their tradition of shape-shifting now upheld in unison, a non-stop frenzy of dissimulation, now a storm-tossed, now a tranquil ocean, flocked by scarlet ibis, pink flamingos, now dreamscape, now valley of the moon. Now ransacked cathedrals, lost rose windows. Now an amphitheater's hushed proscenium. Now leafless aspens, elms, catalpas, willows. Now phantom hollyhock, delphinium. Now flashback, now panicked premonition. Now truce, now skirmish, now pandemonium. Now parachutes, a daredevil battalion floating toward an ill-fated attack. Now blushing debutantes, their first cotillion, now parched oasis, now bivouac, close by each golden tint a golden torch, now red-robed Russian choirs, now ecstatic ovations from thick stands of golden birch, now burnished temple, now tarnished city, now bands of acolytes in mosque, in church, or here assembling legends of coyote, scrambling to get down on their untried knees and thank someone, anyone, for all this beauty. Though maybe it's the frost they ought to praise, the real creator, according to science, how it would melt and freeze, and then, in a matter of mere eons, no wind involved, windy as it is, chisel what must be Earth's most flimsy stone, limestone, siltstone, mudstone, into this. Not surprising, really, when you think what frost can achieve in seconds on a pane of glass. Always a revelation when a miniaturist takes his genius for precision large scale. The landscape behind the mystic Lamb as Christ in the Ghent altarpiece, for example. An exhaustive primer of floral specimens rendered in botanical detail. Art both mainstay and intimate of science. Think Leonardo and science of art. What fools we were to leave the Renaissance behind us, to tear ourselves apart into more and more obscure specialization. Not that it matters here. Science and art, even in conjunction with their on-again, off-again Confederate religion, are speechless in the presence of this canyon. Even God needs two versions of creation at the start of Genesis. Some things defy a single overarching explanation. Maybe everything does. if you look carefully. And what's a day exactly when the sun hasn't yet been added to the sky? That third day might still be going on. Everything I'm staring at still raw. God on overdrive. The frost a madman, consumed by each imaginary flaw. Am I a witness? An alibi? A spy? And what's this delirium, this terror, this awe? Is the sky hallucinating? Am I? Inspiration Point, Bryce Canyon, Utah. Just let me stand here with an open eye. Okay, and I'll read one more new poem. I'm writing this series of villanelles about China. I will not explain why I chose villanelles for China, but you can ask me. In any case, this is a true story, and it's Shanghai Taxi. My daughter teaches us to recite a poem in Chinese, a poem all school children learn. Li Bai, bright moonlight, frost, missing home. It's for the teacher who taught her the poem. We practice in the taxi to the station. Everyone in China can recite this poem. Our driver, stunned, joins in, has us mimic him. Slowly, he exaggerates each tone. Bright moonlight, frost on the ground, missing home. He laughs and laughs, amused by our game, while I'm trying, impossible, to imagine all my countrymen united by a poem. Though once a cab driver recited Omar Khayyam all the way from the Salt Lake airport in Persian when I told him what I do. He missed home. And my father-in-law could reel off every psalm in Hebrew, a brief shtetl education. The sun will not smite, or the moon. Help will come. How can we sing God's song away from home? Okay, back to the book. Okay, I'll try to read what I planned. We'll see if it works. This is Autobiography with Joseph. I figure you people know your Bible, so I'm reading it. It's divided by asterisks. I won't read them as numbers, and they go up to 11. So there's one asterisk, then two, etc. Oh, and I mentioned MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York. Autobiography with Joseph. Sometimes there are only stars waiting to bow down. Sometimes there are only fat oxen. But then, with no warning, they've thrown you in a pit, sold you, bound you in Egyptian jail. It's dark there. You don't speak the language. I left this unfinished 40 years ago. What can I tell you? Nothing changes. The skies do still the right place, the right time, reveal themselves magnanimous with stars. But I've yet to master the syntactic leaps in the insular vernacular of darkness. Luckily, every year in mid-July or so, a fresh crop of crickets, keen, intuitive, with unparalleled linguistic acumen, will all at once noisily arrive, until their departure at the first frost offer nightly simultaneous translations. The darkness, it turns out, is even more at odds than we, hourly wavering from jubilation, 11 sheaves of wheat down on their knees, to what can only be described as melancholia. Darkness of a copse of firs, moonless dark, darkness of the clouds eclipsing darkness, darkness of the sky before the heralded arrival, or perhaps even greater darkness after the departure of those desperate, prostrate stars. Is there anyone who couldn't tell this story? Sometimes darkness, sometimes stars. Your one good garment, an indulgence from your distant father, stolen off your back and stained with blood. Van Gogh even told it. You don't believe me? Go to MoMA. Press through the crowds taking selfies. Surely it's no coincidence that Starry Night contains precisely, count them, 11 stars. He knew his Bible, Van Gogh, had studied it for years, once planned to be a pastor like his father. Perhaps, who knows, he'd have been better off with God. He'd certainly have avoided swallowing that lead-filled paint, cadmium yellow, his favorite. We, however, would be seriously diminished, have only cursory experience of apple orchards in spring, olive groves, almond blossoms, cypresses. What crows over a wheat field can unwittingly accomplish. We'd have to trust our own deficient eyes. Just as I, without Joseph, couldn't have begun to write a poem. Where would I have found the fatal wherewithal without corroboration from those kneeling sheaves of wheat, that makeshift constellation kowtowing across the heavens, its 11 chosen emissaries plummeting to earth until they're extinguished at my feet? Of course. How did I miss this? They're shooting stars, the bent backs, the prostrate torsos, the curve of obeisance, genuflection, the arc of a meteor across a sky, one brief spectacular salam. Unless it's the gilt tip of a scepter straining to anoint you from some vastly inaccessible and soon to be dubious beyond. Its outsized visitation, impossibly bright, compelling your for once intact attention on an errand so drastic, so formidable, it holds even ensuing time at bay. Nonetheless, it's very quickly gone. Sometimes there are only stars waiting to bow down. Only afterwards, and then for years and years, a flimsy harvest of famished corn. Just two more. So this is a sonnet. Psalm 27 on Newark Air Train, mid-December, 4:15 p.m. I'm betting you know Psalm 27. The Lord is it's a light and my salvation, etc. I know it better in Hebrew. All right. Psalm 27 on the Newark Air Train. For an instant, I get a too brief peek at an enormous, psychedelic, hot pink sun, crowding out a fleet of ugly, sleek, steel and concrete slabs on the horizon through the windows on my left. On my right, the glass rectangle of an airport hotel is an outsized IMAX, all neon coral, with the last of the sun's reflected light. Whom do I thank? My Delta pilot for landing my plane 40 minutes early in this dizzy crossfire of light on light? Or the trigger-happy show-off on artillery, fending off the Newark airport twilight with fusillades of gold, my strength, my light? Just one more. This is the title poem. If anybody knows Kathmandu Restaurant on 7th East in Salt Lake City, that's where this took place. They have these electronic photos on the wall. This is true. I mentioned Kaddish, which is a prayer that you say for a very close relative. Children say it for their parents every day for 11 months after their deaths. You would say it for a child, a brother or sister, just a close relative, but not for as long. For parents, you say it for a long time. I also mentioned Shabbat, that's the Sabbath. My look-alike at the Krishna temple. There's a woman who looks just like you in Nepal, Gopal divulges on my 9th or 10th visit to his restaurant, quite exotic for my local strip mall. Not her apparel, of course. She wears a sari. But if she stood beside you, you'd be sisters. I've seen her many times. She lives perhaps 3 kilometers from my home, worships with my mother in the Krishna temple. Is that the tower in my favorite repeating photo from the electronic frames around his walls, a golden-studded brick extravaganza, part chimera, part Himalaya, part exaggeration of a pilgrim's rumor of a glimpsed pagoda, for which I've invented over my kofta and yellow doll a convoluted fable of a woeful Chinese deity in exile on whom some locals have taken pity. But it could be the very place my look-alike approaches every morning for whatever made her mother's mother's mother chant the self-same patternings of syllables she herself still utters every day, always in a different gold-trimmed sari. Yesterday, opal-colored, spangled gold. Tomorrow, amethyst with gold-flecked edges. Today, a remnant from her mother's dowry, diaphanous if threadbare near black lapis, on which the temple's oil lamps detect smatterings of milky white gold pinpoints. Her mother's legacy, a moonless sky, now miserly, now profligate with stars. For the most part, she's motionless in prayer, but every now and then her bangled arm, performing some involuntary gesture, clinks a sotto voce tambourine. Gopal cannot quite recall her name, but among the electronic photos, Gopal changes them periodically. A woman does show up with outsized features, smile all gums and teeth, expansive forehead, nose a raptor's beak, socketed eyes, their blackness goaded on by rims of shadow. There are, I checked, green-eyed people in Nepal. Perhaps even the offspring of the very same marauders whose vodka-driven incursions did Cossacks ever head east, reputedly gave me my own green eyes. My look-alike, in fact, a distant cousin. Let's add a yak wool shawl for every sari, a half shade deeper than its sari's silk, swaths of which we'll use for matching slippers. Let's still each wayward bangle with a jewel, and then move on to anklets, circlets, nose rings, until she's encompassed by a lavishness exceeded only by its attendant silence, enabling us to make out, Sanskrit suddenly our native tongue, her prayer's undying string of sumptuous words. I know not any other reality than the lotus-eyed Krishna, looking like a heavy-laden cloud, his lower lip like the ruddy bimba fruit. Can she mean it? No other reality? Not even the exploding one inside her head? The harrowing one, the fickle one, the fractious, dazzling, disappearing one. Perhaps she could provide a demonstration of how to live your life in such close quarters, preferably a blow-by-blow of every waking minute until I've taken in its far parameters, divinity a countenance, complete with lower lip, you could daily gaze upon and live. You'd even know its instrument, the flute, the fabric of its garment, yellow silk. Perhaps that's why she's so meticulous, my look-alike, about her daily saris. Yesterday, sapphire with red gold swirls. Tomorrow, mother of pearl with bronze gold petals. But just this moment, her mother's wedding dress. In darkness, indigo, but in the light, a skittish onrush of unremittingly discordant fireflies, reconciled across a crush of stars. How is it her mind never wanders? That's all mine does at weekday morning prayers, where I can barely focus on saying Kaddish for my own father, the reason I'm there. Ritual, my single ready ally in an ongoing, mostly losing battle with unprepossessing emptiness. But I'm lost on this new, diminished planet, where now, unless what Gopal says is true, I'm the last one standing with my face. And even when I try, I'm no good at this. Unconsummated daydreams call my name. How does she manage it, my look-alike? Though where exactly could her mind wander with only a single known reality? Which, let's be honest, is all she has. Chances are she's pawned her bangles, if she ever had them. Wears the same all-purpose sari, a hand-me-down from Gopal's mother, cotton shawl, hemp sandals, every day. And that was nonsense about the Krishna temple. Ranji and Srinivas told me all about it 19 years ago at Molly's naming. They brought her a tiny silver cup she drank from each Shabbat for years. We love synagogue. We had no idea. It's exactly like Hindu temple. People talking all the time, walking in, walking out, greeting all their friends, shaking hands, not a single one paying attention. Don't tell me my lookalikes in the back telling jokes like me on any given Shabbat morning. That is, once I've finished madly cramming to chant the Torah. I'm a fraud, a hypocrite, a foul-weather believer, but I'm also superstitious, hopelessly sentimental, and never waver in devotion to those words. The more incomprehensible, the better, especially when I chant them with no vowels or punctuation, just an ornate silver pointer and a scroll. I'll have learned them all by heart, and still they'll stagger me. God himself preempting my own voice to humor Moses with his unnamed name, a name even an atheist could get behind, though he'd take issue with its source, a conflagration, a Teflon bramble. Not that pompous, if resonant, I am that I am. That, of course, is a gross mistranslation. But the apologetic, I hear it with a Yiddish inflection, resigned, I will be what I will be, which pretty much covers everything. From a blue figure robed in yellow silk to a smooth-talking hermetic threesome to my personal soft spot, a deafening, non-negotiable, abiding silence. Who's that gray-haired lady who chants the Torah? The kids at synagogue ask their teacher, my daughter, who rewards their good behavior, a rare commodity in Hebrew school, by entertaining them with imitations. Who knows, maybe one of them in a few years on junior year abroad in Kathmandu will stop my lookalike as she's walking down the street. There's a woman in Salt Lake City who looks just like you. I worshipped with her daughter at the Jewish temple. If only Gopal could remember her name. I've asked him several times. He says he's had no chance to ask his mother. Are there no telephones in Kathmandu? Not only would it secure her existence, but I could speak to her, call out to her, stop her before she starts dressing me up or fabricating cockamamie stories about my great-grandmothers and me. Forget it. I'm no use to you. Go home. If you like, you can visit Gopal's mother first, then head 3 kilometers downhill. There's a hole in the floor, beneath the rug, beneath your bed. Uncover it. Ignore its contents until you find a box carved of sandalwood, inlaid with lapis lazuli, white topaz, tourmaline coral, moonstone, jade. Inside, wrapped in muslin, is a sari woven from untraceable silk thread, each strand colored by a separate hand, with its private rarefaction of the blue dominion between sapphire and indigo, and braided with a single golden filament. I have no idea who worked the loom, or where, or how the disparate fibers were beguiled into cloth, but afterward, your mother's 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 mother whiled away her decade-long betrothal, embroidering each breadth of gold and azurite with still more strands of gold in Kathmandu. Put it on. Krishna's awaiting you. And I won't lie, look-alike. I'm waiting too. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you. So you have questions? Yes.
What advice would you give to inexperienced young folks?
what I give to inexperienced young poets. My advice would be to read a great deal of great poetry. That's number one. That's how you learn to write poems. You read them. That's perhaps the most important advice. The other is develop a thick skin and stubbornness, both of which are probably the most useful things to a poet. You get a lot of rejection, but if you have an idea and you insist on chasing it until you get it, it should work out for you. You just have to be stubborn, and you have to set a high standard and just stick with it. So just keep working at it and keep reading. That's my advice. Any other questions? Yes?
Why a Villanelle for Chinese?
Oh, okay. So, miracle happens. My daughter was in China for 2 years, and I went to visit her. I was on sabbatical, first in the winter, it was southern China, and it's actually spring, which is kind of amazing, but that's another thing. Anyway, so one of the gardens we go to in the ancient city of Suzhou has the putting a question to the spring pavilion. You go to the top of Mount Lushan, there's the poem that was written about it. The Chinese are crazy about poetry. Of course, Chinese poetry, has like 8 words, 10 words, 20 words. You can't write one of my long poems about China, right? That's just wrong, okay? So there was a putting a question to the spring pavilion, and then one of my favorite things in the Shanghai Museum was called The Three Friends of Winter, which is plum blossom, bamboo, and pine. Anyway, putting those things together, I thought, well, maybe I wanted to resonate like Chinese poetry, but how am I going to do that? So I thought, well, villanelles resonate. You repeat things. So I actually got upgraded to first class on my way home from China. This is heaven. This is because of all the chanting I do in synagogue, I'm sure. So it was amazing. So I actually started writing this villanelle that mixes the putting a question to the spring pavilion with the Three Friends of Winter on the plane home. And then I had one villanelle, then I actually wrote 4. Then I got a grant, got to go back to China. And I know that 8 is it's an auspicious number in Chinese because the character looks like, hope and all good things, prosperity maybe. And so I did 16. And it was really, really fun. I had so much fun. Writing villanelles is really fun once you start doing it. If you're a crazy person, maybe normal people wouldn't find it fun. I find it tremendous fun. I love it. So that's the answer. Thank you for the question. Oops, I didn't repeat it. Supposed to repeat the questions? Whoops. Okay. Yes?
So you've said in interviews, and you said in one of your poems that you are very sentimental.
Mm-hmm.
How do you avoid writing some?
Yes. Well, I try not to. You'll tell me if I succeed. I try not to write sentimental poems. I'm sentimental, but I'm especially sentimental about all this Jewish stuff. Superstitious and sentimental, My grandmother, I came with these cookies my grandmother used to. It was a Jewish holiday yesterday. I brought Michael, who I should have thanked you, by the way, for having me. Thank you for having me, Michael. I brought him cookies and his kids cookies, that my grandmother used to make. Now I make them. Now my children make them. This kind of stuff makes a person sentimental. This kind of traditional Jewish stuff. But I despise sentimental poetry, so I hope I avoid it. How do you do that? Me arguing for restraint after reading you these long poems is perhaps a hilarious situation, but I would argue for restraint. Just underdo it. A little emotion goes a long way, I think, in a poem. But yes, it's hard to do. Yeah, I see sort of a hand. I guess so. I don't have an answer to how to avoid it. I'm afraid perhaps I don't. But you can tell me. Like the Counting My Losses poem, there's an example, right? Maybe it's sentimental. I hope not. What I tried to do was make it incredibly spare, and just talk about. And also, it's based on this very, very famous Jewish prayer that you read on the days of awe. Who by fire, who by flood, who by wild beast. How everybody's going to die in the next year. So it's based on that. And then again, I made it really, really spare and had a lot of those rhymes. That was the way of getting off the, I'm so sad because all my daughters, it was online, my daughter started, all my friends are dead poem, Mom. Really good one, Mom. They made fun of me. But I was trying to avoid sentimentality. But anyway, what's your question? I prefer form. I do write in free verse. I read a couple of free verse poems, the Joseph and the section of the Alhambra that I read. Both of those are free verse. I prefer form. The great poet Auden said this. It's easier to write a good formal poem than a good free verse poem. And the reason is that you have some sort of a roadmap. You have a sound you have to hit. You have a word you have to repeat. You have some sort of sense of direction. I'm always tearing my hair out when I write in free verse. Like, what am I going to do next? Like, what? Where do I break the line? What do I do? You know, you never know what you're doing. But sometimes you need, I find I'm in a situation that requires free verse. That another way for me to try out some restraint. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. One more. Yes.
If it is not inappropriate, and I beg your forgiveness for my ignorance, if it is, sing us something,
Sing you something.
and maybe tell us a little bit about how being a cantor informs.
That's a long conversation. Of course, you don't ever sing it without the text. But I guess I could, I probably know the beginning of Song of Songs 2 by heart. I'll try. Song of Songs is a beautiful chant, and I probably know it. Let me think. Okay, I know 2 lines, yeah. So I'll sing you the first 2 lines of Song of Songs 2. אני חבצלת השרון, שושנת העמקים, כשושנה בין החוכים, כן רעייתי בין הבנות, כתפוח בעצי היער, כן דודי בין הבנים. It's the first 2 lines of Song of Songs 2. What is it? I am the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valleys, like a rose among thorns, so is my love among the daughters, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my love among the sons. We sing it on Passover, so that's in a month, so I haven't sung it for a year, but whatever. I know it. I've sung it at a bunch of weddings, too. But yeah, chanting, I talk about it a little in that poem. The truth is, it's a really great thing to do. I always complain about it, but the reason I do it all the time is because no one else in Utah knows how to do it. It's very complicated, but when I was a kid, they didn't let girls. Still in Orthodox synagogues, they don't let girls do it. So I, of course, was fighting to do it. And somebody said, well, even if we let you do it, you wouldn't know how. So I learned how, and now I know how, and I'm stuck to it. Tomorrow, I have a bunch of stuff to learn. I'll get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and learn it. But the truth is, I love doing it because it is such fabulous language. I mean, you know the Bible is very beautiful, but I got to tell you, it's so much more beautiful in Hebrew. Though the King James is a truly great, if inaccurate, translation. But it is very, very beautiful in Hebrew. And chanting it, I have to tell you, like I'll write about the Bible. I write essays, or I'm giving a lesson that day, the rabbi's away, and I'll have worked on it. I'm talking about the thing I'm chanting. Invariably, when I'm chanting it, really chanting it in front of everybody, I notice something I missed. There's something about that level of concentration while you're chanting. And the chants are the punctuation marks. So each mark has a way to chant it, and that mark changes depending on what book it is. So the 5 books of Moses, you chant it one way. The prophets another way, Song of Songs another way, Lamentations another way, etc. So, it's really great. I love it. Even though I complain at synagogue all the time, but I love it, and I always notice more because there's a level of focus. I'm not saying I achieve it every time I chant, but I try to achieve it, and it's very thrilling, so that there's just nothing in the world but the word you're chanting and maybe the next word. And it's great. It's fantastic for a person who loves language. And it is, in fact, the reason I teach a course in the Hebrew Bible as literature, because, especially when you're chanting from the Torah, as I explained, you don't have the vowels, you don't have the punctuation marks. The scroll only has the letters. So you have to basically memorize it. You have to go over it 1,000,000 times, because you're not supposed to make mistakes when you read these things. So you've gone over 1,000,000 times this incredibly rich text. Guess what? you're an English professor, you're going to notice things. So who was I going to tell them to? So I started teaching the class, which I'm teaching this very semester. So it's been great. Though it's probably the reason that the Bible always shows up in my poems, because whatever I'm talking about, invariably I can think of an infinitely better way that the Bible said it. You know what I mean? So that's that. Yeah. Oh, that was the last one. Yay. Okay. Thank you very, very much.